There's a lot of things that are difficult here, Brad, but the decentralized governance is certainly one of them. In short, even Vitalik was participating in the discussion on Twitter saying token-based governance doesn't work, basically. So we take that to heart. And I think as a DAO, everyone's going to need to collectively agree on what is an on-chain or a sufficiently decentralized governance process and censorship resistant governance process going forward. And that's not going to be trivial to design.
Right.
So in short, there's no chance that, at least in my opinion, there's any sort of on-chain decentralized governance mechanism ready for audit in 5 weeks. Instead, the concept is short-term Beanstalk should proceed with, in my opinion, what's still a pretty decentralized solution where there's going to be a multi-sig governed by the community with 9 or more signatures that are really going to be distributed and decentralized. So it's, as long as you expect those signatories to execute the will of the DAO, which will now be voting on Snapshot, for example, for the time being.
Right.
Well, it's obviously imperfect, but necessary to get Beanstalk back up and running in a timely fashion, just because in practice, the fact that the governance could execute arbitrary code on Beanstalk was what presented the vast majority of potential attack vectors.
Sure.
And this attack is an example of one. And so the fact that there's no on-chain governance, from our perspective, does mean that there's a dramatically reduced risk profile to Beanstalk, which over the next couple months is important for people to renew their confidence in the protocol. So any governance model that's re-implemented on chain really should be audited by multiple parties and vetted for a long time as much as. One of the things that's cool, Brad, about what's happened in a glass half full way is Beanstalk is kind of corporate now. There's going to be every time code gets pushed, it should get audited. And there's all these new standards that before it was very much building the airplane while flying it. And
Right.
now, if independent of how this barn raiser goes, this is now going to be a lot of testing before even a test flight.
Welcome to Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel, where we explore projects in decentralized finance that are innovating and driving our mission of financial freedom forward. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review Mission DeFi and spread the word by posting a tweet to the show. All opinions expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests are their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Black Knox, Material Indicators, or any other affiliated organizations. You should not treat any opinion expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests as an inducement to make a particular investment, follow a particular strategy, or become involved with any project. A project being featured on the show is not an endorsement of that project in any way. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Now, here's Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel.
All right. Today I have with me for actually our third interview together, one of the founders of Beanstalk Farms from the group Publius, Ben Weintraub. And Ben, thank you so much for being here. I'm actually excited to have you on because I'm excited, strangely enough, for everything that's happened this week for you guys, despite the fact that it started with a disaster, because I actually think that what's happened this week has made the project Beanstalk Farms stronger and has generated even more interest in a product and a project that I already liked. But welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. How you feeling?
Thank you for having us, Brad. That's certainly a glass half full approach there, which we're not going to have any problem with. How are we doing? Well, we're doing a lot better than last Sunday, and everything is really relative. I'd say marginally worse than we were a week ago from today, but marginally better than 6 days ago. So it's been a crazy week. I'm sure we'll get into some of that, but yeah, it's nice to be here.
That's cool. Look, I have to believe anybody listening to the show knows what happened, but why don't you give us an overview real quick of what happened last Sunday or last weekend, and then what's transpired since?
Sure. So on Sunday, Easter Sunday, Beanstalk was attacked via an on-chain governance attack, whereby an attacker borrowed $1 billion in a flash loan and deposited all of those borrowed assets or converted them into whitelisted assets for deposit in the silo and deposited all of that value in the silo. In doing so, they acquired more than 2/3 of the total stock of the system, which is the governance token. And that facilitated them to pass effectively arbitrary code through the system. And they were able to use their supermajority powers to drain Beanstalk of 100% of its non-Beanstalk native value. So in all, a little under $77 million were stolen from Beanstalk on Sunday. And the protocol was left with effectively zero capital. That happened on Sunday. The attack took about 24 hours because of the nature of Beanstalk governance. So it was launched, there was like a Trojan horse attack that was launched on Saturday, but executed on Sunday. And so Sunday morning, everyone basically woke up to Beanstalk being totally drained of funds. And thus began the craziness of the past week.
Can you explain for people what the funds were that were drained out? Like, what was their purpose? What were they doing for the protocol?
Definitely. So, as we've spoken about before, Brad, Beanstalk doesn't have collateral, which makes it fundamentally different from other stablecoins. And instead, Beanstalk uses its credit to create stable value. However, the price of a bean, the Beanstalk stablecoin, is implicitly a function of how it's traded, or explicitly a function of the value that you can get for it on the market, in effect. So the market where beans trade were liquidity pools on Ethereum. There were 2 Curve liquidity pools and 1 Uniswap B2 liquidity pool. And in short, the value of beans were derived from all of this value in the liquidity pools. One of the things that makes Beanstalk unique is its ability to attract liquidity through protocol native rewards, particularly the stock system. And so over the past couple of months, since launch, Beanstalk had effectively been able to attract collectively something like $77 million of liquidity in the form of non-Beanstalk native assets. And so that was the value that was ultimately stolen from the protocol. And because now there's no liquidity that beans are trading against, the value of beans are effectively worthless for the time being. That makes sense because
Yeah.
there's no liquidity.
And those were paying, there were pretty high gains on those pools for people. So there were a lot of people that were participating in it. I know I had some listeners to our shows, both DeFi Lunch and Mission DeFi, who are feeling the pain this week, but strangely are positive, like what I was alluding to at the beginning of this. But in my first 2 interviews with you, I didn't know your name, but you guys took an action that I was talking to somebody involved with the project and was really worried about you guys doxing yourselves. Like personally, I was worried for your personal safety. I was worried from a regulatory perspective and all other kinds of legal perspectives. And I really thought this is a really bad idea. But you guys decided we're going out and we're going to do an AMA and we're going to disclose who we are. And it's actually been a highly effective move, right? Now, that doesn't mean you don't face potentially some personal risk, but what I think it did was really just dramatically boost the trust in people and reduce the FUD of people saying that you guys had stolen the money, which is there's this one niche of Twitter, crypto Twitter, that every time there's an exploit says, oh, the founders stole the money. So can you speak to what you guys, like, what was that decision-making process for you to decide to dox? Because the first time you were on my show, you were trying to disguise your voice, but you didn't have a voice synthesizer at the time. And so I remember chuckling along as you tried to make sure your voice was disguised, but you got much better at that
Not
with
so
time.
not so well, we would add, but
Not so well at all. It was pretty funny. I actually edited out some parts where your voice was like coming through clear because I was like, okay, this is
because you're a good,
thanks. I actually am a big believer in kind of founders being anonymous. I think it's a really critical part of it, which is why I was worried. So can you walk us through what that decision-making process was like for you guys? Because it's a massive, monumental decision, right? That it could
Yeah, and
impact their family.
it's like crossing the Rubicon. Once you do it, there is no going back. The
Uh,
action has been taken. The die is cast, if you will. So what went into that decision? There were a lot of different factors. The largest was that as a result of the attack, there was evidently a total loss of trust in the protocol itself. And over the past 18 plus months at this point, 20 months from the time we started working on this has really been our heart and soul. And in short, in that moment, and since then, and I would argue for a long time prior to the attack, but certainly since then, we've been in a very explicit way, not optimizing for our own personal well being, our physical well being, our mental well being. We're optimizing for Beanstalk because we believe that there's something here worth sacrificing for. And that's been the case for a long time.
sure.
Now, in practice, we've always been committed, and this was one of the main reasons behind the anonymity. We're really committed to Beanstalk being decentralized in practice. And
Sure.
we recognize that people like to put people at the head of stuff in their minds, and they're leaders, and that's a natural human tendency. And we've cited previously, if you look at something like Ethereum, despite that in practice, the system is incredibly decentralized, people still want to know what Vitalik has to say. And if the goal of Beanstalk is to create money, real money, like a globally used money currency, I do not want to be the guy, Brad, that everyone, and we Publius do not want to be the people that everyone's asking for monetary policy suggestions. The
Sure.
idea is the system should run autonomously and be truly decentralized. And so the cost from our perspective of doxing and disclosing who we were is really that once that's done, all of the work that and there's been a lot of pain in the ass associated with trying to hide our identity as best as possible. We would argue, realistically, we never had any expectation the government wouldn't be able to figure out who we are. I've got Discord downloaded on my phone, signed in as Publius. So it's not, we're running a top secret operation here in the grand scheme of things, but the goal was for as long as humanly possible for the public to not remain, to be unaware of who we were, because we don't want people to look at us as the leaders of Beanstalk in any capacity. And in short, that was a cost that needed to be taken in the short term, independent of the fact that in practice, we have no real control over Beanstalk, as was the case before. It's run by a DAO. The concept is now that we're out there, people may associate us more leaders of the protocol, and we'll just have to continue to do everything we can now as doxxed founders to make it clear that we don't view ourselves as any sort of leader within the protocol. But the long and the short of it was, it seemed like there needed to be in an immediate fashion, a total reinstilling of confidence in the protocol. The concept that, and a lot of our community members, because this was an open discussion, should we disclose who we were, should we not? A lot of the people that are working on Beanstalk or are close to Beanstalk and active members of the community said, we don't want you to dox. We don't care who you are. We know you guys didn't do it, and we're ready to keep working on Beanstalk, whether we know who you are or not. But the real point was, that's not the audience at this point. The people that already know and love Beanstalk, they recognize that was something that Publius would never do. But the concept is, to everyone else who's just hearing about this hack, how could anyone possibly have any faith in the protocol going forward if we didn't come forward and disclose who we were, in short? And so had to be done. I think we were, and still are to some extent, although it's been almost a week, so nothing's happened, which is nice. We were concerned about our physical safety. There's always something associated with that when $77 million or so is stolen. That's, people are angry and people are looking for someone to take that out on, and that's unfortunate. And that's real life. So there was a fear associated with that. We got nothing to hide, Brad. The short answer is we felt like it was a no-brainer because of the circumstances and had to be done. And as much as going forward, we intend to continue to be active participants in Beanstalk, and we want to continue to work on Beanstalk as much as we can with the DAO and with the community and with Beanstalk Farms. But going forward, we intend to still do it as Publius, such that at some point Publius still really can disappear, even if at the end of the day, someone now knows my email address and my phone number and can text me and say, hey, have a question about this or that. So it is what it is, but this is where we're at effectively.
Yeah. One of you, I don't know if it was you, but one of you sent a message relating the story of telling your mom about what happened. That I think we all can relate to that kind of moment. Mom's proud of you. Mom's excited about what you're doing. And then you've got to,
We're home for the holidays, right?
yeah,
This is
yeah.
there's a celebration.
Oh, I didn't even think about this weekend. Oh,
I've been working on this nonsense internet money thing as far as my family's concerned for a long time. And it's only really over the past 2 or 3 weeks as Beanstalk has started to really strut its stuff that anyone could possibly look at what's been going on and say, maybe he's been spending his time pretty well. So it's been like this total, the whole family's here. Everyone's finally talking about, we still have no idea what you're up to, but it's very clear.
it's going well. Yeah.
And I'm Jewish. So there was a huge family dinner for Pesach on Friday night. And 36 hours later, and so my parents are fast asleep. We're now in crisis mode. It's like, hey, I hate to ruin your guys' Easter Sunday, but there's $77 million that's now missing. And they're like,
Wow.
they're boomers respectively. So it's crazy. So the other thing to note is, I think in that moment, and that was prior to the docs and stuff, there's a question of how can we create any sort of empathy or faith with the community that this wasn't us. There's no such thing as, hey, we didn't do it. Like, you're still anonymous. Fuck you. No one's going to believe that.
That's right.
So in that moment, it's like, how can you display any sort of realness that this is real for us too? And this is crazy. Hey, just informed the parents, this whole thing that we were talking about at Passover the other night it's for the time being, it's dead basically. So I think there's a lot to be spoken about going forward. I don't think it's dead, but certainly in that moment,
and look, it's hard to tell your parents that something has failed anyway, but then it's more brutal.
they lost a lot of money too, Brad. They lost a lot of money. It's one of those things where I've had, and I'm sure you can pull up my LinkedIn now, I've had a previous business as well. My parents are like my biggest supporters. They've lost a lot of money investing in me historically. And this was, hey, you guys are finally, at least on paper, now you're doing good. It's brutal. It's brutal. And I don't think that they're not annoyed at, like, the money's not the important thing as much as their children.
Sure.
But it's like, nonetheless, it's, hey, just so you guys know, all this paper money that you thought you had is totally gone now. It's that's not fun either.
That's brutal. That is just brutal. I hadn't thought about Passover. I hadn't thought about all of that. That's
Quite the weekend.
That's quite the confluence of events there, man. That's crazy. That's crazy. Look, I think at the end of the day, that also gives people a little more trust, right? Finding out that your family was invested in this thing and took a hit, it's probably going to be even greater motivator in their minds for you to really make this thing work. But you guys had already invested. Look, from the first interview I had with you, it was clear to me, like, and that's why I've talked about the project so much on the shows that we have. It was clear to me that you were absolutely true believers in what you were doing, and that you were committed to this being decentralized, and you were committed to making this thing work. I remember the first time we talked, you guys had just come out of that massive money in and out and that DPEG that you had there at the very beginning. And you were so excited. It was like so evident of how excited you were that this thing was back to where it was supposed to be. The model was working, the algorithm was working. So I can imagine that day in your life is going to be incredible. But coming out of that, the amazing thing to me is I think the whole idea of this trust being built up was based on that for a lot of people. But coming out of that whole thing, you've actually experienced something pretty amazing. Like, people that have lost literally millions of dollars messaging in Discord and saying, I'm all in. What can I do? How can I help? And look, there are people that are pissed. There are people that were upset and have lost money that's important to them. But I have been absolutely amazed at the community response, just totally blown away. And I think that speaks to how you guys approached launching this. It's probably the most fair launch I've ever seen in a DeFi protocol, and the approach you guys took and the philosophy you had about decentralization. But tell me a little bit about what that felt like.
The long and the short of it is, and I think what for each of us in Publius, Sunday was a personal, if not all-time low, a local low by a wide margin, if they're as bad as it gets. And even before Sunday night, when we doxed ourselves and had the first 3.5-hour AMA, which is one of many we've had since then, the outreach from the people that are either part of Beanstalk Farms and working on Beanstalk or just part of the community to just hit us up and say, hey, we love you guys. We love Beanstalk. We believe in this thing. No matter what happens, we're still going to keep working on Beanstalk. A lot of these people are people that recently quit their real jobs and came to start working in Web3 on Beanstalk. And it's like now Beanstalk Farms is totally broke. And they're like, this is not something we're in it for just the money. Like there's no money in sight and we're not going anywhere. And that wasn't just one or two people. It was 2 or 3 dozen people. And to call that uplifting or inspiring, I think might be the grandest understatement of all, which is we didn't realize, and this is a fact, we didn't realize the effect and the meaning that this had for other people. It had a lot of meaning for us, but it's so hard to know until shit really hits the fan. When everything's going good, everyone's there. That's the way of life. So the real crazy thing is who's there when things are not just going not so good, but when they're as bad as they get. And the percentage of people that are active around Beanstalk that had that perspective, it was mind-boggling, Brad. And it still is. It's very humbling that this is the set of people that are working on Beanstalk. And we feel so lucky to be surrounded by so many incredible people that love Beanstalk as much as we do. And it was so fucking inspiring. Like, how could you not just want to do everything in your power to preserve this, and not just preserve it, but to have it continue on its rocket ship path that it was on before the Sunday shit show, if you will. Yeah.
That's cool. Look, I think it's funny. I interviewed Scoopy Trouples of Alchemix, and one of the things he talked about a lot in our interview was when the protocol really started growing and got to $100-200 million in TVL, he started having like massive panic attacks because while he knew logically that people were going to be investing and putting their funds in this protocol, it really hit him how much responsibility he felt. Not that he could control it. He couldn't control that, but it hit him that all of these people were trusting in him and the team to build something that would work, it would function, they could make money from, and that they wouldn't, that nothing bad would happen. And he said that the panic attacks got so bad that other leaders of other DeFi protocols had to help him like get through it and realize that once it was out there, there wasn't a lot he could do. And so he just needed to keep doing things and better. Was there a time when you guys were like, holy crap, look at all these people putting their money in this thing? Or were you guys so confident in what you were building? I don't mean that from an ego perspective, but from you really felt so strong about what you were building that you knew the protocol would work from a stablecoin perspective, not an exploit perspective.
It's a great question. I'm a nervous guy, Brad. And so it's one of those things where and I think as good as things are going at any point in time, there really is something to be said for that's at that moment. And from that perspective, there's no chickens that were being counted. And I think a lot of people, particularly that were working on Beanstalk over the past month or two, got really enthused about how successful the model was working or being. And the roadmap, the 6-month roadmap that Beanstalk Farms put out, the first line is Beanstalk is an experiment. And in hindsight, that looks really good because it's obviously true. But the point is, there was a lot of pushback from members of Beanstalk Farms saying, hey, we're past the experiment phase. This is working. And at least from our perspective, anytime you have a protocol out in the wild, there really is a Lindy effect, if you know what I mean, where the longer it's alive, the better. And so we deployed Beanstalk without an audit. We didn't have the money to pay for hundreds of thousands of dollars for an audit.
Right.
And the thought was the best way to test the experiment is in the wild. And so from many perspectives, the fact that Beanstalk was actually audited for the first time, and that audit report went live for a couple weeks ago. In theory, that should have alleviated some of the nervousness. I think, to your point about Scoopy, I don't think from our perspective there was as much or any sort of internalized responsibility, if you understand what I'm saying, because
Sure.
we really do believe from a first principles perspective that the code is out there. The white paper was designed to describe the system as much as possible. In practice, even the thing that was exploited was described in detail in the white paper. Like this is very much like, here's the model, go make of it what you will, if that
Right.
makes sense. And the long and the short of it is, the longer Beanstalk was alive, the more secure in theory you should feel about it. But in practice, the dollar value in the protocol is really the target that attackers may look at to determine whether it's worth their time, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
the larger the system and the more value in the system and the more time with more value, the more the Lindy effect really takes hold, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so in short, over the past 2 or 3 weeks, and in practice, this is actually from an economics perspective, in part what facilitated the attack, there was a dramatic increase in the liquidity in the system and the total value locked in the system relative to the bean supply. And so even though the bean supply did basically double over the past couple of weeks, the total value locked in the contract relative to the bean supply actually increased much more than that, because the liquidity relative to the bean supply was increasing. And in practice, the liquidity relative to the bean supply was what allowed them to acquire enough total stock, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But this is a long roundabout way of saying, again, at Pesach, the whole family's there. One of my uncles says to me, "How are you feeling about all this?" And he's got a shit-eating grin on his face because he can't believe the system's working. And I'm like, I'm nervous. I'm nervous because Beanstalk is swimming with the sharks and it's out there, and it's one of those things where you don't know what you don't know, Brad. And I think we did have the humility to recognize we don't know everything. That's one of the reasons of conducting all of this discourse and dialogue and process out in the open, such that in theory, someone could have raised their hands and said, "Hey, this should be changed to X, Y, Z, or yada," or there's a million ways that this could have gone differently. But instead, whoever it was that recognized the problem decided to exploit the protocol. So that is the nature of doing things in an open source fashion. And it was and is something that I think we and everyone that was a part of Beanstalk was really willing to live and die by, because of the decentralized ethos of the protocol. And it's very tough. It's very tough. One of the difficult things is that the audits, there's a lot of auditors in the space, but they're very limited in bandwidth. And so there's an audit scheduled with Trail of Bits that's been scheduled for months and months. That's going to start in 5 weeks from now.
Yeah.
And Trail of Bits is a world-class computer security firm.
Right.
So it's one of those things where the time where there was this it was a perfect storm, if you will, where you had to have the right economic conditions, insufficient amount of audits to found any potential issues. It was one of those things where, again, if we go back to how we started this discussion, not counting any chickens, the system's doing great, but the rapid growth was certainly going to attract a lot more eyes.
Sure.
Some friendly, some not friendly. And it's an ugly business, Brad. It's an ugly business. So
the thing that was exploited was governance, not the protocol determining the peg or the value.
not the economics, it's the governance.
The economics have functioned beautifully from the beginning, but it must be difficult to deal with the fact that the thing that you guys most want for the protocol to be truly decentralized, to have on-chain governance, that must be, look, it is what it is, but that must be the thing that's difficult for you guys, because essentially you've got to come back and re-examine that and figure out how to implement that so that you don't have a weakness around it. And do you think that's something you guys are going to do before the Trail of Bits audit, or you're going to maintain it with multi-sig for a while and see what the Trail of Bits guys say about the existing code that determines that?
So ultimately, there's a lot of things that are difficult here, Brad, but the decentralized governance is certainly one of them. In short, even Vitalik was participating in the discussion on Twitter saying token-based governance doesn't work, basically. So we take that to heart. And I think as a DAO, everyone's going to need to collectively agree on what is an on-chain or a sufficiently decentralized governance process and censorship resistant governance process going forward. And that's not going to be trivial to design.
Right.
So in short, there's no chance that, at least in my opinion, there's any sort of on-chain decentralized governance mechanism ready for audit in 5 weeks. Instead, the concept is short-term Beanstalk should proceed with, in my opinion, what's still a pretty decentralized solution where there's going to be a multi-sig governed by the community with 9 or more signatures that are really going to be distributed and decentralized. So it's, as long as you expect those signatories to execute the will of the DAO, which will now be voting on Snapshot, for example, for the time being,
Right.
it's obviously imperfect, but necessary to get Beanstalk back up and running in a timely fashion, just because in practice, the fact that the governance could execute arbitrary code on Beanstalk was what presented the vast majority of potential attack vectors.
Sure.
And this attack is an example of one. And so the fact that there's no on-chain governance, from our perspective, does mean that there's a dramatically reduced risk profile to Beanstalk, which over the next couple months is important for people to renew their confidence in the protocol. So any governance model that's re-implemented on chain really should be audited by multiple parties and vetted for a long time as much as. One of the things that's cool, Brad, about what's happened in a glass half full way is Beanstalk is kind of corporate now. There's going to be every time code gets pushed, it should get audited. And there's all these new standards that before it was very much building the airplane while flying it. And
Right.
now, if independent of how this barn raiser goes, this is now going to be a lot of testing before even a test flight. Yeah, the circumstances have changed dramatically, in short.
When I want to talk real quickly, because this is one of the things I think is real important in this space that I don't think we're there yet. And that is the audit, this problem of finding qualified and good auditors, and then the fact that they all operate in their own world, their own bubble. And by that, number one, it's incredibly difficult, as you just expressed, to find auditors that have the bandwidth to actually help a protocol audit the protocol. Number two, that's, from what I understand, primarily a manual process, right? It's people looking through code and finding things that are previous weaknesses or potentials for exploit. And then number three, what I haven't heard about is one of the things I'm having difficulty understanding after all this time is I haven't found a firm that's actually saying, okay, how do we synthesize all of the exploits that happen across DeFi into data and utilize machine learning and some AI models to actually be able to scan code to find things that are common, right? Because there are things that, like flash loan resistance and other things that people know about, but it's next to impossible with thousands of lines of code for any developer on any project to know about everything that's ever been exploited. It's just flat out impossible. And I think it's almost equally as impossible, even though they're reviewing code all the time and looking at vulnerabilities and weaknesses, for audit companies to be able to cover that, no matter how great they are at auditing. So I'm wondering if you guys, I want to just get you to pontificate a little bit about what that experience has been like. First of all, trying to get somebody to audit your code. And then secondly, if you think there are things that the community or the ecosystem as a whole could be doing to make this a safer, better process for every protocol.
There is a real shortage of supply when it comes to auditors. And a large part of that is that auditing is largely, even though there is some automated testing associated with the audits, a significant portion of it is manual.
Right.
And the people with the skill set to recognize any potential problems fall into two buckets, Brad. Those that steal the funds and those that work on not stealing the funds. And as we know, stealing the funds pays pretty good, about $77 million. Working, grueling, grinding through code for a salary, it's just a very different, it's a very different proposition for people with a very similar skill set. And it's not to say that they don't exist, that there aren't white hats or there aren't good guys. It's just they're limited. They're limited. And most of the people in the space that have the expertise, they've already made lots of money, if you know what I mean,
Right.
whether through good or bad. And it's like they don't need it. They don't need to work. There's this major supply shortage of auditors. Furthermore, because there's the supply shortage of auditors, there's a lot of compromise that potentially needs to be taken on quality, right? Because it's not everyone can be the New York Yankees. Not everyone could be the LA Dodgers. So it's like sometimes an audit is better than no audit. So what does it mean to be audited? What's one audit versus two audits versus three audits versus 10? Yeah, it's tough. It's hard. It's hard to ever get that feeling of, oh, now it's safe. The thing about Bitcoin's been around for a long time, Brad. And at this point, there's a lot of money on the table if you can figure out how to attack or exploit the rules of the protocol. The fact that that hasn't happened, that's the proof. So in short, no amount of people signing off looks good to me, looks good to me. It provides the same evidence as the Lindy effect of being out in the wild for a long time.
Yep.
And so there's a friction there. There's a tension there as to how much should protocols spend on audits versus risking funds, right?
Right.
How much does an audit cost? Not $1 million. You could get multiple audits for $1 million. So $77 million were stolen from Beanstalk. How many audits should it have tried to pay for? The point is, an infinite amount of audits under this premise are cost effective. Whether all those audits find all the bugs, that's unclear. And so then when you impose onto this economic situation that there's a huge supply shortage of auditors, where even if Beanstalk said, hey, pay you $2 million, we'll pay you $3 million, there's just not enough auditors to go around, basically. So even though Beanstalk was able to attract Trail of Bits, and now also Halborn is scheduled to start an audit May 9th as well, which is very exciting. The concept is, with the exception of when there's a hack and now that Halborn's able to make, room on their crisis calendar for Beanstalk, normally it's, yeah, we can slot you in August. So given that when Beanstalk was launched, it had no real capital behind it to pay $1 million for an audit. That just didn't exist. When Beanstalk was young, even the cost of the sunrise function of 2,400 beans a day was pretty expensive. It's the concept forking over 250 or 400 grand for an audit before anything was valid, right? Before the model had demonstrated anything. That's crazy. So it's one of those things where, given the structure of the auditing space, there just really wasn't the opportunity to get 10 audits done on Beanstalk. Now, going forward, I think the hope is any code that the DAO votes on prior to it even being voted on, if that makes sense, should be audited. So particularly, one of the good things about moving to off-chain governance for the time being is that there's no ability for someone to propose some sort of, Trojan horse a la what happened over the weekend, because now all of the code can actually be reviewed by everyone in an off-chain fashion, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So I guess there is some security vulnerability between the time people review it and the code that is actually executed on chain, if that makes sense. But that's a practical security concern as opposed to a theoretical one, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said for how, as a DAO, Beanstalk can continue to do better and better on the security front. The first audit, the Omniscia audit getting done, that was a huge deal for Beanstalk. Prior, it was 100% code, like new code, basically, that was unaudited. That's scary. So the fact that Beanstalk was very recently audited, that was a big deal in and of itself. Now, again, what did that mean? Didn't mean anything. So in practice, this is the struggle that collectively then itself. Should the DAO spend 5 million on audits? Should the DAO spend $1 million on audits a year? Should the DAO spend infinite money? It's who knows? And it's a question that changes with scale as well. But in practice, because the main thing that should actually provide faith in the security model is having money in the protocol that's not attacked. There's only so much cost that can be justified to spend on audits. I think at this point that cost has increased dramatically. So now
Right.
no one's going to say the third or the fourth or the fifth audit isn't worth it. Whereas before, I think people may have said that. Not
Yes.
to say that there was lots of auditors asking, "Hey, can we come audit Beanstalk?" And now the DAO's like, "No, we can't afford it." It was more, yeah, this is given the very limited audit resources, having 2 auditors lined up is a good start. And the hope is to add a roster of auditors going forward. But got to start somewhere. The first one was just completed. The second one is supposed to start in 5 weeks. And now there's the Halborn one, which will start in 2 weeks. So there's lots of good stuff happening
That's
on the
awesome.
security front. But yeah, it's an impossible question to answer as to what the right thing to do is.
Yep. And you guys are going to launch some bounties as well via Immunify, who I've had on the show. I think that's actually one of the best ways, incentivize exploits and hacks being found so that people actually know they can get paid to actually find the weaknesses. And as the world gets better at tracking and locking funds that have been exploited, I think that's going to become more prison versus a reward for finding something will be more and more viable, I think, over time.
Totally. And while the hacker hasn't responded to any of Beanstalk Farms' outreaches, just saying if you return the funds, you can keep 10% as like a white hat bounty or a gray hat bounty. In theory, that's a security model that's very attractive
Sure.
and was something that we had advocated for within the DAO. Not everything happens instantly, going back to that auditor conversation. And it's in theory, you'd love to have lots of different bug bounties and stuff like that. I think now, given the amount of priority that security is taking on everyone's mind, that the immunified bounties are going to go up ASAP, basically.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. We haven't talked real quickly about what's next, what you guys are doing to try to get funds back in. And what I love about all of this is you're going to use the protocol to save the protocol. And so to me, that is just a beautiful thing. Like it's coming out of this successfully will push, to me, Beanstalk Farms into a much better place.
Ultimately, prior to the attack, Beanstalk's credit-based model was really kicking ass. And the concept is, particularly given that the attack was not on the economic model, it was on the governance model, the protocol should continue to lean in as much as possible to the credit model. And furthermore, just given the economic structure of the problem, whereby there's the $77 million of liquidity that is now stolen or needs to be replenished, the nice thing about a credit-based model is that Beanstalk can issue debt up to as $77 million worth of debt at the protocol level to try to bring in as much of those missing funds as possible. So in practice, the idea, and this is something the DAO has been having a lot of discussion about, Beanstalk Farms has submitted a written proposal, I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, and there's been a lot of debate and discussion around that proposal. And in short, the concept is for Beanstalk to have a fundraiser. Like a fundraiser is a term that is specific to the protocol, if that makes sense. Like it's in the white paper.
Right.
The protocol has a way to, when it needs to raise non-Bean assets like USDC to pay for an audit, it has a structure where it can issue debt in exchange for assets. The protocol already has this. So the only question then becomes how to create terms and how to have the DAO effectively negotiate or present terms to potential lenders to come to Beanstalk, given what's happened over the past week, where it's attractive both for the DAO, where the DAO doesn't feel like they're losing 100% of their capital, which is currently what's happened, and the lenders are highly incentivized to come and lend to Beanstalk for this one-time fundraiser. If so, the community is calling it the barn raiser. So there's this the barn raiser. Now, I didn't know what a barn raiser was, Brad, but it's very cool. I learned about it. It's everyone gets together and very quickly works together to build a barn.
Yeah, it's
And
funny. My relatives on my dad's side are all farmers, and they're Mennonites, and so that is like core part of their community. Like the community always comes together to help the other farmers build, plant, grow, harvest, the whole bit. So it's a perfect model for what you're doing. It's absolutely perfect.
the Beanstalk community is very strong, Brad. And so the concept is, and it's still tentative these are tentative plans. The DAO still needs to vote on a snapshot to move forward with this, but this is according to the proposal that Beanstalk Farms presented a couple days ago and has been updated due to community feedback. There's going to be like a 10-day, the fundraiser will last 10 days. So for the month and a half prior to the attack, there was basically no soil available. Beanstalk was every dollar Beanstalk was willing to borrow from the market, it was getting filled almost instantaneous. And there's very minimal, hundreds or thousands of soil an hour.
Right.
Now there's going to be 76, 77 million soil, up to 76, $77 million. And it won't be beans. Normally it's beans, but in this case, because beans don't have any value at the moment, it'll be USDC or something like that, a la the Beanstalk fundraisers can come and lend to Beanstalk for pods.
Right.
And so the concept is how to have this short term, because normally the protocol responds slowly and steadily, if that makes sense, Brad.
Right.
As we've spoken about, Beanstalk's not in a rush. And normally, if you want to sell your beans at a discount, the protocol doesn't mind. So this is like a one-time thing where the protocol needs to be jump-started. So how can you create the same mirror? How can Beanstalk mirror the normal economic effect it has on the market for lending over a shorter period of time? That's basically the question that the structure of the barn raise is trying to answer. There are really three phases to the barn raise as a whole. There's the barn raise, then there's the haircut to the whole system to scale it based on how the barn raise goes. And then there's like a vesting over time for all the people that are getting recapitalized. But if we just talk about the barn raise itself, and there's lots of details on the other phases as well on the Beanstalk Farms proposal, but I think the economics that are interesting is how the barn raise itself, that first phase, is going to work. So there's two stages. The second stage is easier to understand than the first. So the second stage is where the interest rate for lending to Beanstalk will start at 20%. And the weather will increase by 1% every 10 minutes for 3 days. And the concept is there will be a new pod line for anyone that participates in this barn raiser, or this pod line receives 1/3 of all new bean mints going forward. Normally it's half go to the silo, half go to the pod line. This new pod line will receive 1/3 of all bean mints. So if you're at the front of this pod line, you basically get to cut everyone that's been waiting in the old pod line, and then everyone who's lending in this barn raiser to Beanstalk gets in line behind the first person in line in this new pod line. That makes sense.
Yep.
So the concept is the auction, this 3-day on-chain barn raiser will conclude with the weather going from 20 to 21 to 22, and people can get in line at that weather. Now, the question then becomes, well, it's very hard for the market to actually price itself in advance and to figure out how to price lending to Beanstalk. So the thought is prior to the 3 actual auction, there will be a bidding process where anyone can basically place a bid at a given interest rate and say,
Nice.
I want to bid 100,000 USDC or 100,000 UST at 44% interest rate or 100% interest rate. And the concept is when the auction itself happens, whenever the weather gets to 44% or 100%, your bid will clear and you'll get in line wherever that is. Now, there has to be an incentive to bid. So the concept is there'll be like some time bonus for bidding on the first day versus the second day versus the third day. So the earlier you bid, the more of the bonus you get.
Right.
So that's the general structure of the barn race itself, if that makes sense.
And if you don't bid early enough and it gets to will it be capped at the 76 million?
So yes, 76 and change. So
Yeah.
you won't be able to lend more than that to Beanstalk.
Right. So if it gets capped out, everybody they've hit the max, then if you wait too long, you're going to lose out.
Correct. And if you bid too high of a weather, you bid the max is, I think, 452%. If you bid the max weather and the barn raiser sells out prior to that, then your bid will not clear. Those are good problems for Beanstalk to have.
Sure.
In that scenario, you might expect people to lower their bids to make it more competitive. But I believe under the current proposal, if you update your bid, you do update your bonus as well. So if you bid on the first day and then you update on the third day, your bonus changes to the third day bonus. So there is some forfeiture of time preference there.
Got it. Look, I think the solution is incentivized and based on the protocol, makes it exciting and a very positive thing for you. I know you have a very limited amount of time so far. Got about 10 more
We're
questions.
just moving, Brad. There's a lot going on. So
I'm telling you. One of the things, have you had interactions with other protocols in the space that might be interested in investing treasury funds, those kinds of things into the barn raise?
the short answer is yes, but I can't
I don't mean
say
to disclose.
much
Yeah.
more than that. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of different things that could make sense here for Beanstalk and for other protocols that might be interested in uh, coming and lending to Beanstalk at the moment. There's a couple that to me are particularly compelling, and
Cool.
we are talking to them.
So they become
Uh,
more of a partnership than just,
Correct.
yeah.
And I don't like the word partnership because of it implies some sort of corporation, or it's not the most decentralized term. But from a symbiotic relationship perspective, there's a lot of different opportunities here. With that said, feeling like there's an opportunity here, Brad. At the end of the day, Sunday was it doesn't get much worse than that. How much of
Yep.
your money did you lose? 100%. So it's you can't get much worse than that.
Right.
Uh,
Right. That is the bottom.
The concept is Beanstalk really does have an opportunity to demonstrate the credit model is so good. It's so good. There's so much demand for Beanstalk's credit that even losing how much 100% of the funds the protocol was able to recover, I think that's going to be quite the story.
That's going to be the DeFi story of the year. That to me puts you over the top. I'm excited for that. Um, I'm going to cut us off there because I know you have another thing to go to. But dude, I really appreciate your time. I'm excited for what you guys are, as crazy as it sounds, what you guys are experiencing. I think it'll harden the core community that's contributing to this project. I think it'll harden the project. I think it gives it even more potential. And I was talking to somebody the other day, so they were talking about concerns they have with Beanstalk protocol. And one of the things they were talking about was the complexity of learning it. And I said that actually I think is the thing that saved the protocol, is that all of the members of the folks that have invested so much of their brain power in understanding how the thing works that they weren't about to give up on it because they really understood what was there. And so I think that actually is an advantage. And I also think that one of my responses was the average American doesn't understand how the friggin' economic or financial system in this country works. I don't think there's any problem with Beanstalk getting kind of retail-ish support without people understanding the complexity of the protocol. So I'm excited for you guys.
We appreciate it tremendously, Brad. Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure as always. And it's nice to be here without a modifier holding the nose. It's nice to just be here. So really a pleasure, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Congrats, man. And fingers are crossed. I think you're going to see a tremendous response to the barn raise. And if I can do anything to help, don't hesitate to reach out.
Appreciate it tremendously, Brad. Talk soon.
Take care, buddy.
Take care.
Bye-bye.